Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the trials of Jesus in our continuing study of the life of Christ. John chapter 18, verse 1, we left Jesus off in Gethsemane. We're picking up the action there. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron. Now, the Kidron is a narrow, little tiny stream that runs from north to south on the east side of Jerusalem. It separates the city of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. And so he crosses over this ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden in which he entered with his disciples. Now, the garden is known in the Synoptic Gospels as Gethsemane. The term means oil press, and sure enough, there are, even to this day, at that traditional location, there's still a garden there, and there are ancient olive trees that are nearly 2,000 years old, probably dating to the seedlings that might have been left behind after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place. Now, Judas had wanted to betray him perhaps at an earlier date, but had lacked opportunity. You remember that we discussed that the upper room, the place of the upper room was unknown to Judas until he got there. He did not have previous opportunity to say to the officials, go and you can arrest Jesus at such and such an address in downtown Jerusalem. That just wasn't doable because Judas didn't know, because the instructions that Jesus had given had been very roundabout. Go into the city, you'll meet a man carrying a water pot, follow him, and then you'll see the room. Those aren't the kind of instructions you can pass on. But here was a place that Jesus had regularly used with his disciples, and Judas knew about it. So Judas, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. And it's here that there's a convergence of those arresting Jesus, and Jesus is here waiting for them. Judas then, having received and notice our word Roman cohort. The word Roman is italicized. That's a way for the translators to let us know that they added that word. They think it's appropriate. I'm not sure that it is in this case. Usually when they add a word, I think it's helpful and has that intended meaning. In this case, I'm not entirely sure that it was a Roman cohort. Just because it was a cohort doesn't mean it's Roman. And the context has, noticed the cohort and officers from the chief priests. So it seems to be rather that this is a official group from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They are coming with lanterns and torches and weapons, and they are coming to arrest Jesus. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, whom do you seek? And they answered him, Jesus the Nazarene. And he said to them, I am, and again I have an italicized word, I am he. Now that's understood, that's the way he's answering it, but literally his words are, I am. And that reminds us of something else. That reminds us of the words of Jesus as recorded in John earlier, back in John chapter 8, where Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And when Jesus had said that, he was citing something from the Old Testament, because back in the Old Testament, when Moses had said to God at the burning bush, I don't even know your name, God had said, I am that I am. And so here's Jesus replying in much the same way. He said to them, I am. And Judas also was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Now, we're not told that this was a supernatural activity, but it sure sounds like that. Just the timing of it, that they would all fall to the ground upon his self-designation, I am. And suddenly they all fall down. Therefore, he again asked them, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth, probably, bracing themselves just in case. You can sort of imagine them dusting themselves off. Verse 8, Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way. And notice he does this to fulfill the word which he spoke. And we have a citation here from the Old Testament. Of those whom you have given me, I lost not one. So here's Jesus giving himself over to be arrested. And yet he's doing it in such a way that the other disciples will not be arrested, that no one else will be killed. He will be the one only who is put to death. Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. Now, it's interesting that we have the names not only of the one swinging the sword, but also the one who was hit by the sword. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not contain that information. After all, it was a crime that Simon Peter had committed in attacking, in resisting officials, but by the time John writes, Simon Peter probably has been put to death already. He's already died in Rome, according to church tradition, and so we can mention his name. But not only is his name given, but even the name of the slave, and that has to make one wonder, why is the name of the slave mentioned? Did he become a believer? Did he become part of the church? Maybe. I also have to wonder about the high priest having this slave around in subsequent years. The high priest had opportunity to see Jesus, and here was a living, breathing reminder of the power of Jesus, because the synoptics tell us, it's not mentioned here in John's account, the synoptics tell us that Jesus reached down and healed his ear. Here it was cut off, and Jesus, I don't know how he did it, stuck it back on. And there was a healing that took place right there. And so here's a servant walking around with 2 ears, and we can sort of imagine the high priest in later years watching that servant and just being reminded of the power of Jesus that had been demonstrated on that fateful night. Well, verse 11 says, "So Jesus said to Peter, 'Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?'" Jesus is ready to go and drink the cup of the wrath of God on the cross. So and again I'm going to bypass that italicized word Roman. So the cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was high priest, but notice he was high priest that year. But the high priest originally had been Annas, and what's more is that the high priest was supposed to be a perpetual office that you held as long as you lived, and Annas was still alive. So why isn't he high priest? Well, the reason he wasn't high priest any longer is because of the Romans. The Romans had decided it was too dangerous to have any single Jewish person hold power for such a long period of time. And so they had insisted that Annas hand off the high priesthood to someone else, to a successor. And Annas had accordingly made one of his sons, and then another son, and then a third son, and finally he'd run out of sons to be high priest. And now it was Caiaphas, his son-in-law, who was the high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people. We saw this earlier in John's account about how Annas gets up and says, better he die than that we all die. And in doing so, he was inadvertently setting forth a spiritual prophecy, a prophecy of the Messiah, that would be graphically and literally fulfilled. It's interesting also that we have found the ossuary of Caiaphas. Now, an ossuary is a bone box. We've got it pictured here. Not all that big. What would happen is they would take somebody who had died, they would put him in a tomb, and they would, the body would decompose. They didn't do like so many people do today, where they put all these preservatives into the body. No, the body would decompose, and then about a year or so later, someone would come back and take the body had decomposed. They would take the bones. That's all that's left, and they would place them in a box. And this box was known as an ossuary. Some were very plain, some were very ornate. And in this case, this was quite common too, after the bones were placed in the box, the name of the person whose bones they were would be inscribed on the side of the ossuary. And certainly there's been an ossuary found, and it has written on the side, Caiaphas ben Joseph, Caiaphas son of Joseph. this was the ossuary, we believe it was, the ossuary of Caiaphas the high priest. Well, what we're going to have now are the trials of Jesus. And the first trial we've just read comes before Annas. After Annas, he will be sent to Caiaphas. Now, he doesn't have to be sent a long way. Maybe they were living in the same building or in the same community. I'm not sure exactly the locations here. But the second trial is before Caiaphas. And then the third Jewish trial, each of these are Jewish trials, is going to be before the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of Israel. Even today, you go to Israel and if you go before the Supreme Court, it's known as still today as the Sanhedrin. Those are three Jewish trials, but the Jews will not have the authority to put Jesus to death, so then they will send Jesus to Pontius Pilate. And the fourth trial will be before Pilate. He is the prefect. Sometimes we think of him, and even the scriptures describe him in terms of a governor. I guess technically he wasn't really a governor. He was a prefect, which is a Roman position of authority. He held that authority over the land. And so the fourth trial will be before Pilate. But then Pilate will learn that Jesus actually comes from Galilee, from Nazareth in Galilee. And then Pilate will send Jesus to Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, who is ruling a fourth part of the kingdom, that is that part that is up in Galilee. He is the Tetrarch of Galilee. And so Jesus will go before Antipas, but after a while Antipas will grow tired of the whole proceeding and will send him back to Pilate, and so the sixth trial will be before Pilate. So we have 6 trials. The first 3 are Jewish, the last 4, or the last 6, 4 through 6 are, I guess we could call them Roman, even though Antipas is not a Roman. He's ruling on behalf of Rome. So I'm going to refer to trials 4, 5, and 6 as Roman trials. Now, the location of these trials is not specifically given. We're looking at a model here of Jerusalem as it would have looked a bit later than Jesus' day, all the way up to about 66 AD. That far wall on the very top of the screen, that was not there in Jesus' day. And notice on the right, upper right, we have the temple, and then just further north, we're looking toward the north in this picture, just further north are those 4 towers that make up the Fortress Antonia. Some folk have thought that was the location for the trials. I don't believe it was. I think instead the place where the Roman governor would have been the palace that had been constructed by Herod and formerly by the Maccabees, the Hasmonean palace, on the west side of the city. This is probably where the trials are going to be located. And likewise, the house of Annas and the house of Caiaphas would be close to this, in what we call the upper part of the city. You see all those parts with the red roofs? It would be in this upper part of the city, so that we have a fairly close geographical distance between all these trials. Otherwise, you have Jesus, being taken from one end of the city to the other end of the city and back and forth like that. And I don't think that's taking place, because if so, there's no way all the trials could have been conducted that night and been done by early morning. But that's indeed what will take place. It will be completed by early morning, because they are all in close geographic proximity to one another. John chapter 18, verse 15, Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now, we're not told the name of this other disciple. John usually tells us names of various disciples doing things. He mentions Andrew, and he mentions Philip, and he mentions Thomas, and others. But he doesn't mention this other disciple, and sometimes that's because that's him. It seems like, and John makes this clear when he gets to the end of his gospel account, that he often refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. Now, he doesn't describe this other disciple by that term, so maybe it's somebody else that we don't know. But Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple, and this other disciple, whoever he was known to the high priest, and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter wasn't allowed to do it. He was standing at the door outside. He didn't know anybody on the inside. He didn't have a way to get in. And so the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. So Peter also comes into the place where Jesus is being tried. Now, not right into the very room, but he's at least in the building. He's at least maybe within seeing distance. And then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples." Now when she says, "You're not also," that presupposes, I think, that the other disciple was known to her, and she says, okay, he's a disciple, and you're also one of this man's disciples? And Peter put on the spot, suddenly, he says, "I am not." Now he had been willing to fight for Jesus. He'd been out there swinging his sword, cutting off the ear of Malchus, and ready to take on whoever touched Jesus. But now he's beginning to think better of that, and he's put on the spot, and he denies knowing Jesus. Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold. It does get cold, especially this time of the year, at night. You're up in the mountains. And they were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. Now meanwhile, the trial is beginning. John chapter 18, verse 19, the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together, and I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. They know what I said." They're trying to question Jesus, and he's under no obligation to answer them because he has already taught very openly. He says, "Go talk to the people I taught." You don't need me to say it again. I've already taught in the hearing of everyone. When he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" And Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me? You see, you weren't supposed to be striking witnesses." But there's a great many illegalities that take place in these trials. Well, verse 24, so Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. And so we go from Annas, the first trial, to Caiaphas now, which will begin the second trial. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" And again he denied it and said, "I am not." And one of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, he's maybe got a bit more reason to notice who Peter is, to recognize him, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him? Weren't you there swinging that sword every which way?" And Peter's really on the spot, as he sees it anyway, and he then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Here is Peter denying Jesus exactly the way that Jesus had predicted, had prophesied that Peter would deny him. Well, after about an hour had passed, another man began to insist. Now, we're looking at the same account, but this time it's in Luke's account, the same story, the same event, but I want to show that something else is added by Luke. And notice that after about an hour had passed, another man began to insist, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. This is the part that is added by Luke. John doesn't mention this. Where Peter denies Jesus, and they are not standing right next to each other, but within seeing distance, and Jesus could turn and look at him. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had told him, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And just as had been said, it took place, and then Jesus turns and looks, and it all comes to mind. In verse 62, and he went out and wept bitterly. Well, let's go on with the second trial. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him and beating him. And they blindfolded him and were asking, saying, "Prophesy, who is the one who hit you?" And they were saying many other things against him, blaspheming. Here they are treating their prisoner not with respect, not with civil propriety, but taunting and beating him. When it was day, now we're coming to the third trial. When it was day, the council of elders of the people assembled. This is the Sanhedrin, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council chamber, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I answer a question, you will not answer." They are only wanting one thing. They're only wanting to put him to death. But from now on, Jesus says, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. They had asked him about authority and about power in the past. Jesus says, you're going to see it, but it's going to be in a location and from a direction that you did not expect. And they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "Yes, I am." And then they said, "What further need do we have of testimony? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth." As far as they are concerned, Jesus has convicted himself by the claim, and they're the ones who asked him. They're the ones who brought it up. They're the ones who Jesus hadn't been running around earlier saying, "I'm the Son of God." The very fact that they asked the question shows that they had an inkling of who Jesus really was. But it is this statement upon which will be based the decision to put Jesus to death. Let me underscore that. The crime for which Jesus is going to be executed, as far as the Jews are concerned, is this claim to be the Son of God. This claim to be Messiah. Luke chapter 23 and verse 1, "Then the whole body of them got up and brought him before Pilate." Now the next trial is before Pilate, and the reason the trial before Pilate takes place is because the Jews have no authority to put somebody to death. Now, Pilate had a rather checkered career ruling in Canaan, in Palestine. When he had first come to Jerusalem, they had, as a sign of Pilate's authority, they had the Roman guards had brought in Roman military standards, banners and the Roman eagle affixed up top, which the Jews looked at and considered to be idolatrous. And so they had rioted, and a number of Jews had been killed in those riots. Later on, Pilate had gone into the temple and had taken the money that was set aside there, the Korban money that had been dedicated to the temple. He took that and used it. He says, we need to raise taxes, and taxes aren't enough, so I need this money. And he had taken it. And again, this had led to a revolt and civil unrest. There was another instance where a rumor began to circulate that a treasure had been found on Mount Gerizim up in Samaria. And treasure hunters had sort of descended upon the mountain, people looking for this or that or the other treasure, and seeing this as a sign of revolt and of civil unrest, Pilate had sent Roman guards to the scene, and they had killed a number of Jews. So the Jewish people didn't really care for Pilate. He didn't really care for them either. And there had been considerable unrest. Before the end of his career, Pilate will be subsequently, not immediately, but eventually called back to Rome, where he will stand trial, and then he will be banished to Gaul, that is modern-day France. Well, seeing that, we're going to just see the background of this trial. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the Praetorium, and it was early. Now, the Praetorium is probably a reference to the place where the prefect is, and specifically, I think that probably would have been the Hasmonean Palace that we looked at earlier. Well, here they come to the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium, so they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. They're about to eat the Passover. It's that time, that season, and they don't want to defile themselves ceremonially by being in the same presence as a Gentile. But they will defile themselves, spiritually speaking, by putting an innocent man to death. Verse 29, therefore Pilate went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? You have a trial. What are you accusing him of? And they answered and said to him, if this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. They don't really, notice they don't say, well, he said that he was the Son of God, because Pilate's not really going to be concerned with such things. He's not particularly religious. He's not concerned with the Jewish views on religion. And so that's not going to cause him to act. And they get that. And so instead they say, well, he must have done something wrong or else we wouldn't have brought him to you in the first place. So Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. If you found him doing something wrong, you judge him. The Jews said to him, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. Notice, they have already decided that the penalty for what Jesus has said is going to be death. They've already passed judgment upon him. But they're not allowed to carry that out. And so they are appealing to Pilate, verse 32, to fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Jesus had talked about being lifted up. And indeed, the Old Testament had also talked about the Messiah being lifted up. And so that is in view here. That is how it will be fulfilled. Only the Romans killed somebody by lifting them up. That is, they would crucify them. The Jews did not go in for a death by lifting somebody up in any way, shape, or form. They would throw rocks at somebody until they fell down. They didn't lift anyone up. Therefore, Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, are you the King of the Jews? And Jesus answered, are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me? Jesus actually pushes Pilate a little bit. What causes you to ask this question? Are you seeing something, or are you just repeating hearsay? Pilate answered, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done? And Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting. Remember, Peter had been ready to fight, but Jesus had stopped him. If my servants were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this world, of this realm. You see, Jesus is a king, but he's not a kingdom of these kingdoms that are these earthly kingdoms. His kingdom is a heavenly kingdom. Therefore Pilate said to him, so you are a king? And Jesus answered, you say correctly that I'm a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate said to him, and he sort of quips back, what is truth? I'm not sure if Pilate was really interested in finding out what truth was. If he was about to hear it. But I suspect rather that his words form more of a quip, as though to say, I can't believe anything. And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you the King of the Jews? Their custom was a custom of leniency, that Pilate would traditionally release someone at the time of the Passover. And there was somebody to be released, and so Pilate's saying, how about if I release Jesus? But they cried out again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a name, but it's also a name with meaning. Bar is the Hebrew word son, so son of, and then son of Abba, son of a father. You could almost refer to him as any man's son. But this any man's son was not a very nice fellow. He was a robber, not merely a thief that breaks in, but a robber who uses force to steal from someone. and he had been captured, and apparently he was awaiting crucifixion. He was awaiting his final judgment. And Pilate offers to let him go. And they don't want they don't want Jesus. They want instead Barabbas to be released. Pilate offers Jesus the release of Jesus, and they would rather have Barabbas to be released, this robber. What we have here is Jesus dying the death that Barabbas deserved. And in that, Barabbas becomes a picture of us, because Jesus died the death that I deserve and the death that you deserve. He died for us. He died in our place. He died on our cross. And that is salvation. Because he died, then I can live as I trust in him and am credited with the very righteousness of Christ. Well, they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Notice how there's some half-truths and some non-truths, some downright lies. He wasn't forbidding to pay taxes. He said, "Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's," including the money. Did he say that he himself is the Christ? Well, he only said that in response to their question. And he has admitted now to being king, but he had not previously claimed that. So Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him and said, "It is as you say. Jesus is the king of the Jews, but it's a different kind of kingdom." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." This is the second time that Pilate says he's not guilty. Now, when somebody says not guilty, the very next sentence is supposed to be, you're free to go. But Pilate isn't doing that because Pilate wants to be politically correct. He's more concerned about what the people say than about whether something is true, or whether a man is righteous, or whether a man is innocent. But they kept on insisting, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as this place." But when Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. If Jesus had been stirring up people all the way as far as Galilee, is that where you're from? Verse 7, "And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was in Jerusalem at that time." He says, well, "Okay, I can dodge the bullet here. I can do the politically correct thing. I won't let him go, but I also won't have to pass judgment upon a righteous man. I'll just give him to Herod, and Herod Antipas can settle this issue." Now, this is the fifth trial. Now, Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he had wanted to see him for a long time, because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. Herod had seen John the Baptist, had imprisoned him, had spoken to him at length, had even ordered that John the Baptist be put to death. He had wondered for a time, when upon hearing about Jesus, was this John the Baptist come back from the dead? But he'd never seen Jesus, and now he wants to see him and maybe see a miracle performed by him. And he questioned him at length, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes were standing there accusing him vehemently. Here's Jesus being accused. He's being surrounded by enemies and accusations. He will not answer any of those. And Herod with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. Now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that day, for before they had been enemies with each other. Notice how these two that are both more concerned with their own agenda rather than that which is true and righteous, they make friends. It's interesting how the enemies of Christ sometimes team up against him. And that's what's taking place here. Well, Pilate then took Jesus. We're now at the sixth and final trial. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him, whipped him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, as if to add injury and insult together, to multiply them both together. they take this crown of thorns. He's a king. Here's what they think of a king of the Jews, and they plant this crown of thorns upon his head and put a purple robe on him. That's the one that maybe the folks from Herod Antipas had donated. And they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and to give him slaps in the face. Now, before that had been a Jewish guard, it looked like this anyway, seems to have been a Jewish guard that arrested him, but now these are Pilate's men, these are Romans. So I have both the Jews and the Romans coming together to eventually to crucify Jesus, to mock him, to hate him. The whole world seems to be joining in. Hail, King of the Jews, and to give him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." For a third time, Pilate says, he's innocent. He's a man who has done no wrong. But Pilate is still unwilling to do the right thing concerning that. Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man! Look at that." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God." They want to kill him because of their own law, because of their misinterpretation of it. Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid, and he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" Remember this whole issue of authority that we've seen in the past? Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Pilate has been given authority to do what he will do. But there is another that is in control. And notice how that there has been a conspiracy of Jews, of even from Jesus' disciples, Judas Iscariot, of Romans, and can I say it this way? Even from heaven, both from hell and from heaven, even the Father has been involved in delivering Jesus over to be crucified. All of creation and the Creator himself are in on the plan. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Now they are appealing. The Jewish crowd is appealing to this pagan emperor, who they hated. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. Now, when we read 6th hour in John's account, that's not 6 hours after sunrise. That in John's account, he seems to be using Roman time. This is the 6th hour, that is what we would call 6 in the morning. All this has been taking place in early morning hours. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So then he handed him over to them to be crucified. And so they take Jesus away to the cross, where he will be crucified, where he will die, and ultimately from which he will rise again. When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took the water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves. You crucify him. I want to wash my hands of the whole matter." And all the people said, "His blood shall be on us and on our children. It will be within 40 years of this very day that the Romans will have surrounded Jerusalem and will be seeking to break through the city, and ultimately, finally, will indeed capture Jerusalem, burn it to the ground, and the children of those who are standing here will be slaughtered by the Romans. Their blood will fill the streets, their blood will run down the causeways and down through the sewers. Then he released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Jesus now goes to the cross to suffer, to die for us.